This is the theBreaker.news podcast for the week of March 27th, 2022. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the theBreaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 231. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest, the Is It Just Me commentary, I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker, and the Big Deal feature, the latest on Vancouver's 2030 Winter Olympics bid. Councillor Colleen Hardwick, who is running for mayor this October, wants the ballot to include a yes or no question on whether Vancouver should host another Winter Games. Hardwick joins me to explain her motion going to City Council on March 29th. But first, is it just me? Is it just me, or do some politicians make no sense at all? Premier John Horgan is sending $110 to every British Columbian with an ICBC vehicle policy to make up for the pain at the pump. Every British Columbian includes those who drive electric vehicles, people who don't feel the pain at the pump because they don't drive gas-powered cars. This happened the day after TransLink's board voted to hike transit fares in Vancouver by 2% starting in July. Meanwhile, Vancouver City Councillor Colleen Hardwick, who you'll hear later, is proposing a plebiscite on the October election ballot to let civic voters decide whether they support another Olympics in Vancouver in 2030. The grassroots Vancouver 2030 group supports the idea. They think they can get voter support to bolster their bid. But Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart and Musqueam Indian Band Chief Wayne Sparrow have poo-pooed the idea. Stewart is mayor because he won the 2018 election by just 957 votes, with 28% of support. Sparrow is chief of the Musqueam because he got 319 votes out of all 497 that were cast in the band's 2020 election. Dustin Rivers is chair of the Squamish Nation Council, and nobody voted for him last year because nobody ran against him. He won by acclamation. Surely the voters of Vancouver, heck, all of BC, including every First Nations tribe, should be allowed to vote on hosting the Games. It'll cost well over $2 billion to happen and take time and money away from more important things like running hospitals and schools and keeping our communities safe and environment clean. Magna International tycoon Frank Stronach raised the alarm last week. He told the Financial Post that Canada is close to a public debt crisis and even compared the nation's finances to Greece, which needed an emergency bailout due to its debt load. Greece gave the world the Olympic Games. Greece also gave the world democracy. Maybe Vancouverites should use it. What do you think? Email Bob at theBreaker.news. This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.news podcast. Before Vancouver was named as the 2010 Winter Olympics host in July 2003, voters went to the polls, and 64% of them said yes to the bid. In February 2020, Vancouver 2010 CEO John Furlong hatched the idea of a 2030 Vancouver Winter Olympics. Last December, Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart, Whistler Mayor Jack Crompton, and leaders of the Squamish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Lil'wat nations struck a committee to explore the bid. Since then, the Canadian Olympic Committee has offered its support. Vancouver City Councillor Colleen Hardwick says it's time to press pause. The 2030 bid should be no different than 2010. Let the people decide. She has tabled a motion for the March 29th City Council meeting aimed at adding the Olympic question to the city election ballot this October. The IOC wants to name a 2030 host sometime next year, and Vancouver doesn't know what this could cost, let alone the real cost of the 2010 Games, which remain locked up at the city archives. Here's my interview with Vancouver mayoral candidate and City Councillor Colleen Hardwick. Kennedy Stewart early on, as well as John Furlong, had said, that there should be public consultation in the form of plebiscite, but they haven't moved on it. So you're the one moving on it. Why do you think it's been up to you, and why those who have been pushing this forward haven't done it on their own volition?
Well, I believe we need to ask the people, our residents, whether they support this or not. And if the only chance that they're going to get to do that is at the ballot box in October, then so be it. there is a disconnect. I hear constantly from people across the city that they feel that they're being ignored by City Hall and that they don't have a voice. So if the only chance we have to have a voice is on election day on October 15th, then we should be asking this question as well, because it's going to have a huge impact on people's lives across the city.
And we still don't have the full picture of costs from 2010, and we don't have any picture at all about possible costs for 2030. Isn't that troubling?
I want to make an informed decision, and if I can't see the books from 2010 until 2025, that's still 3 years from now. How am I supposed to make an informed decision? I think that's the point.
And the problem with 2025 is that's 2 years after the IOC deadline. They're on a cycle. They want to decide no later than 7 years before an Olympics who the host is. So their deadline really is a hard deadline next year, and it looks like the Canadian Olympic Committee and the boosters here are pushing towards the 2023 deadline, and they're trying not to stop for consultation, especially in the new reality where the IOC wants to negotiate behind closed doors rather than full-scale bidding. This is a decision that could change, again, Vancouver forever, like 2010 did, and add extra costs and higher taxes.
Okay, so personally, I would like to see the books. If we're in a big hurry to get this approved prior to being able to see the books in 2025, maybe somebody can do something to bring that back so we can see the books now. Because I think it's irresponsible to be making decisions without a full spectrum of information. So that's number one. Number two is, again, there is a very strong sense in this city that people, our residents, don't have a say outside of the election cycle. It may have pandemic and the fact that public consultation has been just online, but there is a pervasive understanding out there by everyone that I talk to in all of the neighborhoods. And as you know, I've been doing the 50 neighborhoods visits going back to the beginning of 2020. Every group that I talk to says the same thing. We do not feel that City Hall is listening to us, that the public consultation process is more of a marketing exercise, or I've even heard it described as manufacturing consent. So if we don't have trust in our public consultation process as is, what alternative do we have than to play it out during an election cycle? So I think it is absolutely the appropriate time to be asking the electorate, that is the people that live and are eligible to vote in our election, to determine whether or not they support moving ahead with the Olympics, given what we do and do not know. And all local governments in British Columbia are on the same election cycle. And so maybe what Vancouver can be an example to other municipalities, that they might add a similar question to their ballots. So that is the answer to that question. Then with respect to the maturity of the city and the real estate situation here, that's a whole other longer discussion. Someone's trying to call me at the same time I'm trying to respond to you. But that's, whether or not I am supportive of the Olympics or not, what I keep coming back to is this is a decision that needs to be made by the residents, by the electorate, of whether they're prepared to go through this again in its new form. And I don't know why anyone would have a problem with that. The boosters, as you describe them, can go out and, maybe this is an opportunity for them to get more people to vote. As you know, there's usually, with local elections, you may get 35% turnout. Well, maybe you'll get a bigger turnout if people know that they're voting on whether or not a new Olympics should proceed. The key thing in all of this is really involving the electorate in the decision-making process.
I've spoken to someone at the Squamish Nation, just an average person not involved in politics, but someone who's an activist trying to get transparency there. And I was told that there has been no discussion, no consultation, even in the Squamish Nation, that this is really a Chiefs-led exploration or Chiefs-led bid, not a bid led by the common people. Does that concern you as well, that the way this is being framed, that the politicians, the chiefs, people in the business community, but not the grassroots, the people that have to pay for this, are not being consulted?
I would have hoped that the First Nations, they have elections too, and seeking support from their membership, to me, would seem part of their democratic process. It shouldn't be one group trumping another. Are we saying that because the First Nations are involved with this, and that should supersede the will of hundreds of thousands of Vancouverites? It should never be put into that kind of us or them position. That's not the intention here. What has to be considered is the impact on a broad spectrum of people's lives. That's really at the heart of it. And again, from a First Nations perspective, and like you, I have friends and family who are regular people in First Nations, not part of the leadership. And I know that anecdotally anyway, they would like to be able to be asked the question as well. So at the end of the day, the question has to be put to the people. The election cycle is the appropriate time to be doing that. It's not going to cost an extra X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars to conduct. It's just adding another section on the back of the ballot.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, why would we be afraid of it? Why would anyone be reluctant to have this question asked? If the supporters of the Olympics bid are enthusiastic and feel that they have a strong case to be made, then they should be making it, and they will be successful. But if they're not, then we'll hear the will of the people. And I would rather be hearing the will of the people in a referendum than, what I hear all too often, which is, oh, you elected us, so we're going to make the decision for you. I think this is a big enough question that the decision should be made by the people themselves.
It's time on the theBreaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In the Taiwan news, Chinese IUU fishing is destabilizing maritime security. IUU stands for illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. At least 3 billion people rely on farmed or wild-caught seafood as their primary source of protein. A large number of vessels involved in IUU fishing hail from China, which has also been the world's largest exporter of seafood since 2002. Its deepwater fishing fleet numbers 3,000. In the Hong Kong Free Press, COVID-19, Hong Kong opens 6th quarantine center built with mainland help. Hospitals seek blood donations. Chief Manager of the Hospital Authority, Larry Lee, said the 5th wave had affected the citizens' willingness to donate blood, and hospitals will run out of blood in 3 to 4 days. The new isolation center at Tam Mei in Yulong District was built by China State Construction International in 3 weeks and will provide almost 9,500 beds in almost 2,400 rooms. Chief Executive Carrie Lam attended the handover ceremony on Thursday afternoon and said the 6 quarantine centers could, in total, provide almost 20,000 beds. In stuff.co.nz, Wellington councillor accused of praising himself via secret Twitter account. Wellington City Councillor Sean Rush would not confirm or deny whether the account with the handle LocalBod1 was his. Quote, I'd have to check what it's tweeted to see whether that's appropriate, he said on Friday. The account was later deleted after the call to rush. The first tweet from the account claimed the spin-off political editor Justin Giovanetti unfairly paraphrased Rush at a council meeting. The account often replies to tweets in support of Rush and with climate change denial views. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In the Oregonian, revised suit alleges Portland Church, former pastor and lawyer, engaged in racketeering and unemployment fraud. The original complaint named Jimmy Wicks Jr., the lead pastor and president of the church, a co-pastor, the church, and Living Room Coffee House as defendants. They're accused of conspiring to have church members work for little or no wages and then using the profits to pay for salaries, buy real estate, and hide profits. In the Spokane Spokesman Review, tougher now than it ever was. Mattis talks Russia-Ukraine war, China, capital attacks in visit to Wazoo Pullman. Former Secretary of Defense and Marine Corps General James Mad Dog Mattis said he is only surprised by how inept Russian troops have been. What it might take Russian President Vladimir Putin to back down, however, is the big question, Mattis said. China's stance through the war, between refusing to condemn Russia and amplifying unsupported claims that the U.S. is financing biological weapons labs in Ukraine, have been telling, Mattis said. Quote, I think very few nations are going to look at China's role right now as anything but full-fledged support for Russia, he said. Quote, China has shown their colors again, I might add. Mattis also said the capital attacks left him disgusted. And in the Victoria Times Colonist, Langford blasted as expensive and isolated in review that slams Rugby Canada. Langford is not viewed as a positive place to live, states the report. Overall, the report concludes Rugby Canada is grievously lacking a high-performance strategy or vision. Canada will miss the Men's World Cup in 2023 after having qualified for all 9 previous editions. The women's sevens team went from its bronze medal in the 2016 Rio Olympics to crashing and burning and not even making the quarterfinals at the Tokyo Olympics last summer. Langford is also in the riding of Premier John Horgan. That's Cascadia Calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
And it don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone, you won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to Dax De Silva, who made his fortune with Lightspeed Payment Processing for donating $14.5 million to the BC Parks Foundation. The donation will help protect parkland in Pitt River and French Creek from development. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca.
Show me bracia, kozac,
That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of March 27th, 2022. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 27th of March in 1964, the Good Friday earthquake, a 9.2 magnitude record earthquake, shook south central Alaska and killed 125 people? Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox. For news as it happens, follow The Breaker News on Twitter and visit theBreaker.news on Facebook. You can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/thebreakernews. That's patreon.com/thebreakernews. Until next week.